All right, it's time. I'm doing the thing. I'm gonna start sharing my screen, and here we go. Okay, it's happening. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me on a rainy Sunday morning here in Portland to talk about money, which is everyone's favorite and least favorite subject, I think. We're going to do some low-key writing exercises throughout the next hour, so I would love it if you could grab a writing implement and some paper while I just run through these opening remarks. This conversation is going to touch on most of the things that I said it would in the description, but I also would like to be honest with you. I didn't want to give this talk. Don't get me wrong, I love talking about money and transparency and success and creative careers, but the truth is that giving talks for me is usually a process of reckoning with some thorny quandary at the center of my own life. And the act of gathering my thoughts on a subject like this usually precipitates change. And I'm not always ready for change. So back in May, I tried to give a talk that I had given a number of times before to a group of graduating students at an art school. And it was full of good advice and encouragement and all the usual stuff that I usually say, but it felt so at odds with what we were going through and what we are all still going through. Nothing has been normal this year. Nothing is going to be normal next year. There is no vaccine that can erase the things we have gone through in 2020, the sheer volume of reckoning that has unfolded around us. And so we're all reimagining in big ways and small ways what normal even means and what we might do to change it. So yes, I am going to talk about things that will help you make and manage money in your creative career in the next hour, but what I would really like to do is talk to you about lighthouses. Who doesn't love a lighthouse, right? They're great. I mean, just like really, absolutely wonderful. I left out of bed in the middle of the night earlier this week because I realized lighthouses are the whole thing that this talk hangs on. It's a talk about values and power and how we orient ourselves when the going gets rough. So let's set the scene. When I tell you we are going to talk about money, some of you may feel a certain kind of way. And usually it's like this, right? A little bit of up, a little bit of down, a lot of screaming, a lot of waves, chaos. In 2018, Capital Group surveyed a collection of 1,200 Americans, and the vast majority of them said that they would rather talk about marital problems, mental illness, drug addiction, race, sex, politics, and religion before they would be willing to discuss their finances. A whopping 43% of Americans don't even know how much their spouse makes, which is buck wild to me. But then again, I think you've probably all seen this in action. You're in a conversation with a bunch of people and somebody asks a question about a salary or what someone got paid for a job. And they say, oh, I'm making a decent amount of money, or I am comfortable. What does that word even mean? We're so adept at dodging the question of how much money we make because we are afraid. We think, my friends will judge me for making too much money. We think my friends will judge me for not making enough money. We think my friends will judge me for how scared I am to even look at my money and how little control I feel I have over how to allocate it to support my lifestyle, right? Like so often we are approaching money like this. And when we do that, especially to get back to the lighthouse thing, when we steer a ship like that at sea, we wreck ourselves on the rocks. So everybody needs a lighthouse. This is my friend Lillian. She works here in Portland and is an amazing resource for financial education. She has a radio show / podcast called Oh My Dollar, which is incredible, and a book called A Cat's Guide to Money, which is incredibly charming and approachable. And I did some of the illustrations for it. You can see one of them right here. Lillian has impeccable personal style, does videos and audio snippets and posts that demystify finance education specifically for people who don't fit the standard career model. So that's like millennials, gig economy workers, freelancers, all of that kind of stuff. So several years ago, I took a workshop that she was running about budgeting, and she had us do an exercise involving a bunch of paper clips that hammered home a very clear message. A budget is a system of values. And to me, budgeting had always been synonymous with stress and anxiety and deprivation, but in Lillian's world, it became this expression of possibility, something defined in the positive. Money, she tried to explain to us, and I eventually internalized this, is a tool. It is freedom and choice and power, which means that we can wield it. And presumably, we would want to wield it according to our values. Okay, so shit, what are my values even? I don't know that I could have like pointed to them explicitly if you had held a gun to my head up until a couple of years ago when I started to investigate these questions for myself. And there's a wonderful interview with Aminatou Sow, the co-host of the podcast Call Your Girlfriend. She gave an amazing interview about having a year where she made 6 figures, really excellent, financial, successful, whatever. And the quote that she had in there that really stood out to me, that stuck with me ever since, is the question I wish more people asked is, how do you spend your money? Not how much money do you make? The way that we spend our money is a reflection of what we value in our lives and in the world and in the kind of future that we want to see. So in the interest of helping you all maybe get towards identifying some values for yourself, I am going to throw up a slide with a bunch of values on it. Here they are. I would like you to grab a piece of paper and spend the next 5 minutes brainstorming a list of values. And you can crib from this list, you can make up stuff on your own, you can mind map, you can doodle, you can stare out the window, you don't even have to write anything down. There's no limit to how many you can pick. Go off in the weeds, there's no rules. I'm gonna play some music from my phone into my lapel mic because this is the world that we live in. And it's about 5 minutes, this song, so go wild. Okay, that's enough of that. So hopefully you have a list of values on your paper right now. We are going to do one more of these. And this time around, on a different sheet of paper in a different area or a different window you might like to stare out of, I would like you to spend the next 5 minutes writing down people you admire or envy. They could be dead, they could be alive, fictional, whatever. Again, give yourself permission to draw from anything and to be petty. I really encourage you, if there is a friend of yours whose successes make you feel a certain kind of way in your chest, write those people down. I think it's important to recognize that jealousy is information about the things that we want for ourselves and might be afraid to go after. So I'm going to cue up some more music. I just want to know about the people who elicit a strong reaction from you, positive or negative. All right, and we're going to start wrapping up this one. Okay, so some lists. One coastline can have many harbors. When our values and ideas of success run counter to the dominant cultural narrative of what those things should look like, it can feel like you're trying to steer your ship into a busy port. There are overwhelming numbers of buoys and channel markers and cruise ships everywhere. It's overwhelming. There are bright lights. It can be hard to know where you should turn. What we're really doing here is starting to explore what success means for each of us. And I think there are different realms for success. There's emotional success, communal success, material success, and external success. And again, these are by no means exhaustive lists, but some of the things that might go with each of these categories are accomplishment, pride, satisfaction, fulfillment, ways you want to feel, an impact that you might want to have in your community, things that you would like to possess or a quality of life you would like to enjoy, and things that you want other people to think of you, which I think is also kind of a social thing. Engaging in these questions and doing these exercises, however vague right now, is to build our own lighthouses, brick by brick, board by board. Your lighthouse may cut the dark like a knife. It may have a beam the strength of a small candle. It may shine at a frequency beyond the visible spectrum, but it is yours. Building these lighthouses and orienting ourselves by the people that we love and that we admire, who inspire us, is a crucial part of our craft. I find that I'm cutting my values on the process of becoming more involved in my own life, in civic life, in so many different areas. And I'm realizing it's a lot like college. I changed majors 3 times because you don't really know what a department is like until you take a class in it. And I don't regret anything about being a flighty undergraduate. I learned so much as a theater major and a classics major and an English major. And I even learned a lot eventually as a studio art major. I probably put myself under a lot of stress about not choosing at the time, but I'm blocking that out and just saying that you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to change your values. And you won't know what they are until you explore them. So I'm telling you right now, you're not going to come out of this talk with anything concrete, but this list is something that you can look at in the weeks and months to come and refer back to. You can add to it, you can journal about it, you can write it down once and never look at it again, and I guarantee it will still enact some sort of change in you. I think it certainly did for me. Understanding your values helps you allocate your money in a way that makes sense to you, from Lillian's budgeting workshop. It helps you say no to jobs that might not fit your overall goal and keep you focused on the mountain. Neil Gaiman gave a commencement address once where he described this idea of the vision that he wanted for himself in the future as being like a distant mountain. And the question that you just ask yourself in every juncture in the road is, does this take me closer to or farther away from my personal mountain? And finally, the more rooted we are in our own sense of success, the better we can resist enforced dominant narratives from outside of our own sphere of experience that might tell us what we should be doing, which don't actually fit with what we believe. So because I did promise some practical things, I'm going to run you through 5 things that changed my financial life with boat metaphors, obviously, is very important. So in 2012, right as I was starting out as a freelancer out of college, I began tracking my finances. I used a program that used to be called Outright and has now been purchased by GoDaddy, and I am resistant to change because it's stressful and I usually try to do it at the last minute at tax time. I would recommend a program right now called Wave, which is free and allows you to track your business expenses and generate reports of your income and outlay. This, I think, is akin to plotting a course when you are at sea. The process of navigation often involves coming up at regular intervals, every hour on the hour, and taking sights. You're looking at the stars, you're looking at the celestial bodies and the horizon and your compass and trying to figure out where on earth you think you are at that moment in time. And then you're just adding a dot on the chart. And then the next hour you add the next dot, and the next hour you add the next dot. And when you look back, you can see where you have come from. And that is such an invaluable practice, both at sea and in one's personal life. The second thing I decided to do was pay a professional because I am not number adept by nature, and I knew that taxes were going to be a stressful and anxiety-inducing thing for me. So I hired my accountant, David Tuck, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I think accountants are kind of like bar pilots. At the mouth where a river meets the sea, there's generally a very turbulent stretch of water that can be difficult to navigate. And there are pilots who are specifically trained to navigate ships across those boundary waters. They are helicoptered out to vessels or motorboated out, put on board. They get the vessel across the difficult stuff, and then the captain goes back to being in charge of the ship. Exactly the same. Perfect. In 2014, I started investing in a direct relationship with my community. I launched a Patreon page. I had run my first Kickstarter in 2012, but I really think it is important to have an avenue where the people who believe in what you do can give you money. Patreon didn't change my life overnight. When I launched my page initially, I garnered about $300 a month in support, which is still amazing. And I think speaks to the fact that that launch came after several years of self-publishing, going to conventions, building community. I'm a cartoonist. I didn't introduce myself at all at the start of this. Sorry about that. I make graphic novels. They're right here. I even put them out to hold up. Look, here they are. God, professional. They all came out through Kickstarter. Kickstarter has kind of changed my whole deal, but Patreon is the thing that is the bedrock of what I do. So what people say about investing or saving for retirement, that idea of like early and often, same goes for investing in a direct relationship with your audience. It pays off over time. That initial sum of $300 slowly over the last 6 years has grown to just shy of $2,000 a month, which pays my basic expenses. Talk more about that later. I opened up in 2016. I got on stage at a big conference here in Portland called XOXO and told everybody that I had been on food stamps for the first chunk of my career. And the year that my first graphic novel came out and got a starred review, and I went on book tour with it and I got an agent, all these flashy things were nothing compared to the excitement I felt at being able to pay for my own groceries. And that discrepancy was eating me alive. And so I got up in front of 800 people and told them all about it. And it turns out that that can be a really empowering and powerful thing to do. And it's really informed so much of the work that I've done since then. In 2017, after taking that workshop with Lillian, I started budgeting. I use an app called YNAB, You Need a Budget. It's incredibly useful. There's a bit of a learning curve, but their blog alone, I think, is really valuable if you're looking to learn more about that. Oh, I didn't talk about how this has to do with being on a boat. Investing in my community is like finding your crew. I don't know. I'm losing the boat metaphor. Let's keep going. And then in 2018, I started doing something called whiteboard accounting, which I stole from designer Frank Chimero. And he described this thing where you figure out how much you would need to earn in a year in order to feel comfortable, not just your basic expenses, but like being realistic about what you really want in an ideal world to be able to save for retirement or buy a house or like give a bunch of money to charity, whatever's your thing. Again, values. You should be able to figure out what you need per month and then expand that over the course of a year. And the way that he laid it out is you would make squares representing $1,000 each. And every time you earned that $1,000, you would color in a square or cross it off. And the idea was that if you reached your target number before the end of the year, then you're done. It gives you an excuse to actually like take the end of the year off. And it, more importantly, I think defines a sense of enoughness. Okay, so when I spoke at XOXO in 2016, there was another cartoonist there, David Reese, who gave a talk that was also about money. And he shared 14 years of data about his income over the course of his freelance career. And at the time, I didn't have enough in my bag to really share with people what my numbers were in a way that felt like useful. Now it's been a decade, more or less. And so, or I guess 8 years. So here is that slide. This is just a screenshot from my accounting software. I didn't have time to actually write the discrepancy between each of these columns, but the green is income and the orange is expenses. And I can tell you that, you know, with the discrepancies of these, my salary, like what I take home after I'm done running my business, has fluctuated from negative 10 grand a year up to 46,000, I think is the most that I made, which actually feels like, you know, a starting salary to me. And the reason that I share this is because it was years in my career before I learned from a candid conversation with a cartoonist friend that she had earned over $100,000 in a single year. That was gross, not net after expenses. But again, it didn't seem possible until she revealed that to me. And we're going to talk a little bit about possibility in a minute. So going back to lighthouses, 2020 is not a lighthouse. 2020 is like 50,000 kilowatts being washed over absolutely everything. And this year has illuminated so much. If you're anything like me, you're coming out of this year with a greater awareness of social inequality and our reliance on each other and our own internal resilience. There have been so many subjects that have come roaring into the public eye this year, but of course, chief among them is racism in America, the treatment of Black Americans, and specifically, I think, to this conversation, the hashtag publishing paid me, which was started by fantasy author L.L. McKinney. And this was an amazing project. I highly recommend that people search out the hashtag if you haven't already looked at it. There's a spreadsheet of findings. Essentially, McKinney challenged white authors, particularly, to share how much they were paid in advances for their work, and then compared it to what Black authors were receiving from publishers. And in an interview after the hashtag blew up and sparked all kinds of conversations within publishing, she said that bringing these discussions to the fore doesn't just benefit Black authors, it benefits everyone. And this conversation, it's important to keep the focus where it is intended, which is on this particular pay discrepancy. There are plenty of other conversations to have about how people of color are treated more broadly in publishing, but this broader theme is that when we talk about money, especially as women or as queer folks or as people of color or any group outside the dominant narrative of financial literacy, more of us win. And when I say win, what I really mean is we have the freedom to wield that power however we choose, according to our values. So this is what power looked like for Octavia Butler. I don't know if any of you have seen this before. I hope some of you have. This is the inside of one of her commonplace notebooks. And it is, I won't read the whole thing, but I just like Google Octavia Butler commonplace book and you'll be able to go through all of it. But there are affirmations here, goals of what she wants her work to do in terms of its success. But there are also statements about what she wants to do to help her community, to send poor Black youngsters to writing workshops and colleges. But she also wants to be able to hire a car whenever she wants to be driven places. I love this page so much because it encompasses both community nurturance and deep, deep self-respect. This is a woman with a lighthouse. Like, you can practically see it. And it is such a boldness to be able to assert these things in the world. The trouble is that a lot of the time we don't know that this is possible until we watch other people doing it. So I have this big grand notion that we should just normalize giving people money. But the trouble is that once I learn a thing, whether that's to do with budgeting or like writing affirmations in your commonplace book or literally anything, I tend to assume that everyone else knows it too. And I'm really scared of repeating myself or being boring. And so I just kind of internalize that and move on with my life. I think a lot of us do this, but we need each other to help imagine this world. So I see friends on the internet doing things that seem really obvious in hindsight, but at the time, couldn't have thought it possible. Same goes for my friend who told me about making $100K in a year. There's a comics publisher named Annie Koyama who is an absolute idol in this respect. She's been giving $200 and $1,000 micro grants to creators whose work she thinks is deserving of greater recognition. You can do that. My friend Mara Zapeta, who is an absolute paragon of community-based funding and alternatives to toxic venture capitalism, maintains a list on her website of all of the organizations she supports, and you can do that too. Somebody I didn't even know offered me a $3,000 interest-free loan after I had talked about the struggle of not being able to reprint my first book when the Kickstarter run had sold out and there was still demand, but I didn't have enough liquid capital to do a print run. I didn't know that person. They trusted me. They had money lying around and they were like, you could probably use this. Don't worry, pay it back when you're able to. And I did, and it was fine. And like, you can do that. You don't have to do it to me. It's okay, I'm good now. But I think, I believe that giving somebody money is taking them deeply, earnestly seriously. And it's a feeling that anybody who has ever hand sold their first book to someone at a convention can tell you is a very specific kind of magic. We can do that for each other. We are teaching each other how to do this better. And this is why I'm really invested in talking to my friends who are working in high salaried tech jobs, just as much as I'm interested in talking to my friends who are just starting out and struggling to make ends meet in the freelance workspace. We all have a responsibility to wield our power well. We need to be talking to each other. We need to understand what we can bring into being together. And we need to have the perspective that allows us to see the systems that are keeping us apart. So if this talk seems a little less nitty-gritty and a little more wooga-wooga, this is why. 2020 has zoomed me out and made me aware of the places where my values are coming to the fore and the places where they are not. Like many of you, probably, I have spent so much time in my life and my work running away from pain. I don't want to feel like that, I say. I don't want to be that way. I don't want to screw this up. I don't want to make the wrong choice. I don't. And I realize that it is so much less frequent that I find a moment where I am moving towards something with all of my enthusiasm and intention. And so I'm asking myself, what are the conditions under which I allow myself to have a vision and to pursue it? What needs to be in place for that to happen? To engage with these questions is to build our own lighthouses. I love this lighthouse so much. So, okay, this is the part I don't want to talk about. Sometimes you build a lighthouse and you steer towards it with everything you've got, and it brings you into new waters and it guides you safely past hidden dangers and complex coastlines. And then you arrive in its shadow and you realize that there are other places you need to be. Oops, it happened to me. I thought that as a creative person, I was somehow exempt from that narrative of like go-getting young women in corporate America who like hit a certain age and realize that their work is no substitute for family. And that's not entirely what's going on here, but it's part of what's going on here. The pandemic has simultaneously narrowed and exploded my field of vision. Whoever is in my quarantine bubble is the crew of my ship, and the sea around us is thick with blood. It stands to reason that we should be with the people that we love the most. For the last 10 years, I have been orienting myself to the lighthouse of independence and trying to exist on my own. I'm very quick to say that anybody who is making their career work in any way that works for them is valid. You are all valid. If you have day jobs, if you work 5 part-time jobs, if you're freelance, if your spouse supports you, I don't care. All of you deserve to call yourselves whatever craftsperson name you would like to adopt. It's your right. You can claim it. But this year also ran me up against the fact that I had not afforded myself that same luxury. My father is 81. He has dementia. I'm an only child. And for so much of my life, I have been wrestling with the knowledge that at some point, I think it will be right for me to move home and help my parents. My mom is 9 years younger and she is shockingly competent, but she has a screenwriting career of her own to focus on because she's a badass. And doing all of the cooking and cleaning and managing doctor's appointments and everything, that's too much for one person. Because of Patreon, because of the independence that I've built, because this year I signed a deal for 3 graphic novels, which is like ostensibly the dream, I realized that the dream is not cutting it anymore. It was the right lighthouse for this season, but now it's time for me to go and be with my family. And that's why I didn't want to give this talk. Because it means admitting that there really is nothing wrong with being 31 and moving in with your parents. You can still be a financial success in your own eyes and choose to look after the people you love, something that our culture doesn't always place a lot of weight on. So if you are wrestling with something that feels irreconcilable within you that has to do with money, or that has to do with success, or that has to do with what you are orienting yourself towards, just remember, it is great to have goals. It's great to build lighthouses, but spare a little bit of thought for what will happen after you reach them, after they guide you home. We're all sailing in all different kinds of boats. They are small and large, and we can throw lifelines to each other. We can set up little fires and help guide each other through this year, which has been intensely challenging, and whatever your year is yet to come. That's it. Thank you. These are places that you can find me, my social media for Twitter and Instagram, my website, and my Patreon. I would love to see you in any of those locations, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and we can do a bit of a chat for Q&A. Whew. Now this is the part where maybe the question and answer happens. Hi, Lindsay. Oh my gosh, this is so fun. I couldn't see my screen. This is the most disconcerting public speaking experience ever, because you can't see any of the people when you're presenting on your screen. All I could see was my slideshow. And now this is like we are having an actual conversation, which is so nice. Kat, I love you so much. I'm so glad you're here. People who are watching this, oh man, this is all good. This is from the talk and we get to hear about it now. Forget Q&A. I just want to watch what everybody had to say about the conversation. I also love that so many of the names here are people that I know, who are friends, and humans who I know grapple with these questions around being in freelance careers and who are making it work in all different kinds of ways. Having good music in the background, I totally stole from Kat. I'm going to plug that Kat runs a group called Connection Club, which is incredible. And we get together twice a week, have done throughout lots of pandemic months, to write letters to ourselves, to people that we care about, to voters in swing states. It's a very self-directed and welcoming environment. I would highly recommend her work. She also has great music in the background when we do these things. Her website is weshouldgettogether.com. I'm also really curious to see what people's values lists were. If you want to tweet at me, I would love to hear about what values you came up with and what various insights you might have had. Who are the people that you admire? Also, a point on that, if there are people you admire who are touchstones for you, tell them. Write them a letter or send them a tweet or write them an email. Ooh, the list is bringing up feelings around guilt, shame, and fear. Good. This is good. I will talk for a second about my work. For those of you who aren't familiar, it seems like from the comments, a lot of you are friends of mine already, but the book that I published most recently, 100 Demon Dialogues, is a collection of comics about my relationship with my inner critic and imposter syndrome. And I have it on good authority, helps people feel less alone when they are dealing with feelings of guilt and shame. Great, there are links to buy the books in the chat because the people running this are amazing. But you can also read them all for free online at numeral 100 Demon Dialogues with a U, English, .com. Yes, they're all online. I give them away for free. You can watch them there. Yes, to publishing paid me being so useful. One thing that I did not manage to pull together in my frantic dash to complete this talk was a list of resources, because I knew I was going to ramble and talk about a lot of other stuff. And I wanted to make sure that there were links that people could follow in case you didn't manage to jot stuff down. So if there is a good place, I will publish it on Twitter and include links to all of the things that I referenced. And hopefully that will give you all some places to follow and things to follow up on. It was interesting to realize as I was writing this, like how many lighthouse related things had been cropping up in my life. My friend Christina Tran, who's an amazing writer and poet and actor and community builder and zinester and cartoonist, ran a blog on Twine that was like a choose your own adventure blog called Lighthouse, which I am obsessed with and adore. I will include a link to that as well. She is magnificent. And yeah, all the other things that I talked about. Yeah, the child becoming a parent thing, Maya, I love you. It is, I think in 2016, talking about being on food stamps or talking about financial transparency was the scariest thing I could imagine. And I feel like I derived a lot of power from confronting that head on, and not just in doing it for myself, but in the generosity that met me when I brought it to that crew of people. I imagine you are a very similar group of people who are working very hard to do the things that you believe in and to live lives that align with your visions of what justice and passion and creativity look like. And I think it is such a tricky thing to try to reach the point where you are able to constantly be at the boundary of like what is scary next to jump into. And I think the thing that I'm struggling with or have been struggling with that I'm so grateful for this talk for, I haven't really done much public speaking in the pandemic. And that was why I put so much pressure on myself, was like, you have to articulate everything right now. But it is really important to be able to say when things aren't working. And it's also, I guess the thing that I'm realizing is that it took time to come to the realization of what the next frontier was, and I wasn't really ready to grapple with it. And now I know that it is helpful to talk about it publicly. And yeah, now it's parent stuff. It used to be money. Now I'm not scared of money anymore. I guess this is the point I'm trying to make. I didn't want to give this talk because talking about money doesn't scare me the way that it used to. And I feel like good public speaking always stems from a place of fear. That sounds really bleak, but like it stems from something genuine. Beth just asked if there is anything that the pandemic has changed about the kind of work that I want to make. And 1000% yes. I did things really differently in 2020. I was still recovering from the insane book tour that I scheduled for myself in 2018 to celebrate 100 Demon Dialogues coming out. And I spent like 263 days on the road away from home. It was incredible and transformative, but I burned out so hard and I feel like I'm still recovering. And this year, the pandemic has encouraged me to really slow down, to make more work for myself, to focus on smaller communities of people. Erica, I can't believe your cat batted my face on the screen. That's the sweetest thing I've ever heard. Love you, Tig. And I did a 100-day project, same thing that created 100 Demon Dialogues. I did one in the pandemic, but I didn't tell anybody. And usually, if you know me at all, you know that I'm a big proponent of like, give everything away for free, and then somehow people give you money, and that's a career. Doesn't make much sense, but it works for some reason, at least for me. And I really struggled with like having something that I didn't share publicly. But it was transformative and cool. And I think I'm about to turn it into a transformative and cool and kind of secretive project. So do follow me. I would really recommend my newsletter, which I think is tinyletter.com/Lucy Bellwood. I should have put that one up there too. I'm going to primarily be talking about this with people who really know me or like are in the inner circle. So you could become a public follower on Patreon even, and that would fit the bill too. I do a lot of free stuff there too. Maya, I was yakking and I didn't see your question. Yes, okay, good. The comparison conundrum. How do you fight to do something you find interesting or compelling when others in your industry are headed in another direction, or you assume they are? Oh God, I still worry that I have signed this book deal simply because it seemed like the right thing to do to be successful as a cartoonist. And I am scared out of my gourd that this process is going to take, I don't know, 6-8 years, probably the rest of my life. It's so much commitment to draw a graphic novel. And like the thing about being self-employed and self-financed or like financed through crowdfunding is that people are giving you that vote of confidence to be able to just like go off and do the thing that seems right to you. There's something about, I describe myself as being someone who's way more afraid of success than I am of failure. because I worry it's going to be the wrong kind of success and then I'm not going to be happy and people will think I'm ungrateful. I don't know. It's a whole thing. I feel those feelings. I look at people who are making comics all the time in the industry and I get really stressed about it. I sometimes worry that I don't deserve to call myself a cartoonist because I'm not drawing comics as much these days. But I think at the end of the day, like grounding yourself in the things that make you happy. It's that question of not like, what do you want to do or accomplish or how much do you want to make, but like, how do you want to feel? And I've been trying to pay more and more attention to how I feel. If I feel stressed out and anxious and overwhelmed, and you know, all the rest of it, I find that it is very helpful to have positive, again, that thing about like orienting yourself towards rather than running away. Like, I think times when you feel that comparison, it is really important to orient towards and like surround yourself with the people who are doing the thing that you want to do. If there's nobody else doing that thing, that's also fine. Like, you can find friends who get it and will cheer for you, even if it's not their thing. And yeah, I recommend that. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to ramble about them. We have a few more minutes. One more question. I'm so curious to see what this is like after when the recording comes out. It's much nicer to be able to talk and feel like I'm interacting with people. But I'm glad to hear that the music worked and that you were all able to write down some values and things in the course of that. Boats though? Oh boy, my camera is backwards. I don't know how to deal with that, but there are some nice boats on the wall. Yeah, my first book, which I didn't really talk about, Baggy Wrinkles, A Lubber's Guide to Life at Sea, is a collection of comics about the time that I spent working as a tall ship sailor on an 18th century sailing vessel. God, I did it again, much like the ones there on the wall behind me. This book, the other one makes you feel less alone about your imposter syndrome. This one will make you run away to sea and join a tall ship crew. So like, read with caution. Great for kids ages like 8 and up, I would say. Both of these. 100 Demon Dialogues is weirdly popular with babies. I think that's because it's high contrast and not because babies are experiencing an unprecedented crisis of imposter syndrome, but could be different. Ooh, Kate, could you talk more about gratitude? Yeah, okay, this talk is like the love child of 2 talks I gave at the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators last summer. They're both recorded and online, and I will link to those in my list of resources too. I would love it if you watched them. In there, I talk about my theory of gratitude economies, which folks here have maybe heard me describe before, but the idea that this draws a lot from Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift, which is a deeply important text to me. And I think there are 2 prongs for gratitude. There's the gratitude economies angle of like how operating in a relationship with your audience where you are giving each other gifts, like you give them the gift of your work and they give you the gift of their financial support, which is different from capitalism where I'm like, I'm not going to give you the thing until you give me the money. And then they're like, all right, here's the money. This is more, it's different somehow. Like, how can we cultivate those kind of giving spaces? The other kind of gratitude is like moving through the world as a person who lets people around them know when they have made an impact. And I think the way to know when to do that or like how to do that is to consider, and this is something I didn't really talk about that I would have loved to talk about more in the talk, but like, what is the feedback that feels tangible to you? And this may not be true for everyone, right? It's a golden rule situation where like what is good for you might not be good for someone else. But I do try to think about like the flood of tweets after you announce a piece of good news for me is very transient. My brain is like, this doesn't count. This is rote. This is like a conditioned response to people on social media. The things that stick in my ribcage are like people emailing me out of the blue. And there's a section I had to cut from the talk because it was too long about object permanence, which is something I'm really curious about right now, of like how we don't trust that our audiences and our creative selves will be there if we have to go away for a while. I operate on such a small margin of trust with all of these places, despite having tons of evidence to the contrary. So I think the feedback that I get that's asynchronous, if somebody like takes the time to write to me and I didn't tell them to, that is so meaningful. And it keeps me going Often the things that people are saying is that work that I have made keeps them going, but we don't know. Like, none of us are clairvoyant. And I think gratitude is the thing that must keep us going, because it allows us to, again, set up those lighthouses for one another. And you never know. We never know how long our work is going to live, or who it is going to touch, or who it's going to help. So next up, you can go to Finding Women's Voices. That is the panel that is going to be directly after this one on exactly the same platform that you are streaming on right now. And I will wind it down. I'm so grateful to all of you who watched. I know who some of you were because you were chatting. Thank you for making your voices heard. And thank you to Yola Bokaflod for having me. Best named organization and online literary event in Portland. And I'm going to go collapse in a puddle, and I will talk to all of you on the internet, I hope.